been out of the kitchen for a little while. One of our dogs died, the dark brown dog who was often in the background in my videos, looking up at me with hope in his eyes, hoping I would drop something. He was a great boy, and I miss him, so it was hard to stand in the kitchen and smile when it wasn't in my heart. So I am back because someone wrote to me and asked me a question about sorghum flour. And sorghum flour I used to use more often than I currently do, just because I got lazy and I found Bob's Red Mill baking 1-to-1 and started using that a little bit more often. But I still do have a lot of different kinds of flour, and that's something that I always have enjoyed, experimenting with different kinds of flour. So what I did is I got motivated and made a flour chart. And I will put this on my website because what I've done is I've broken this out between not highlighted is not gluten-free, not grain-free. So that's like whole wheat flour, white flour, rye flour, barley flour. And then I added gluten-free, and that is the yellow highlights. That would be quinoa, rice, teff, oat, millet, cornmeal, amaranth. And then I added gluten-free and grain-free, and those are the green color, and that's soy, tapioca starch, potato flour and potato starch, garbanzo. You can go to my website and see everything that's on here. It's pretty, it's not comprehensive, but it's as comprehensive as I was going to make it, because these are flours that are not unusual to use. So, for instance, almond flour I use very often. I use it to make cookies, I use it to make cakes, and I like it because it's fairly high in protein and fairly low in carbohydrates. So it's an easy to use flour, and it's predictable. I always know what the texture is going to be. The ones that like white rice flour. Now that's one that I don't use as much because sometimes it can be a little bit gritty. Coconut flour I use, but I use it sparingly because it's like a sponge. You always have to increase your liquids when you're using it. I like cassava flour a lot, and sometimes I use it by itself, and sometimes I use it as a blend. Tapioca flour, the only time I use this all by itself is if I'm making Brazilian cheese bread, and that's the basic recipe. It's cheese and tapioca flour. First time I had that was on a tasting tour down in Florida years ago before the pandemic, and man, I said, that is good, and I learned how to make that. And I do have the sorghum here that I had the question about, and boy, it was a couple weeks ago, so I don't remember what the question was. I think it was just a basic question of, can you use it? Yes, you can. So the reason I don't use it a lot is it tends to get dark, and the more of it that's in a recipe, the darker your recipe is going to be. But sorghum flour has 25 grams of carbohydrates and 4 grams of protein. So one of the flours that I really like, and I didn't happen to have, is oat flour. So what I did is I grabbed some quick oats, I ran it through the Vitamix, and I made some oat flour. You can do that with dried chickpeas too if you want to make chickpea flour. And chickpea flour is another one that I don't use that often. It's really high in protein, but it has a slightly bitter taste. So for me, that's one that I will use if I'm making soca for my husband. Other than that, I generally don't use it. So it's better in a savory dish than a sweet dish, and soca is a savory dish. So there's actually a recipe for it on the back of the chickpea flour. So this is a basic mix that I did, I don't know how many years ago. I don't usually put dates on here. I can tell from looking at the, let's see. This is probably about 6 years old. So this one you could use for pancakes or muffins, or you could use it for cookies and scones. I don't think I'd really use it for crust, pie crust. I kind of like the almond flour for a pie crust, depending on what I'm making. But this is going to be a cup of oat flour, and going to use the sorghum flour, and I will use, where's the rest of them? I will use half a cup of sorghum flour. Is that the half a cup? 2/3, half a cup. And the sorghum flour, what can I tell you about that? Where I put my list, right here. Sorghum flour has 25 grams of carbohydrates and 4 grams of protein. That is just about the end of it. Just top it off and let it be the end of it. And you can see this flour is a little bit darker than the oat flour. And the oat flour is certainly not white either. And next to a piece of white paper, or even next to some rice flour, which tends to be very light colored. Here, I'll show you. See, that is very much darker than that. But I'm not putting rice flour in this. I am putting coconut flour in this, and I am adding half a cup of coconut flour. Also, you don't want to put too much of this in, again, because it is like a sponge. There we go. And finally, the tapioca flour. Hopefully I have a half a cup of this. So this recipe is really easy to remember, mostly oat, and there's a cup of that, and then half a cup of everything else. And this is a basic mix that you could even put in a container and keep in your pantry and pull it out when you want to make pancakes, or, oh, not quite half a cup. Oh well, it's not the end of the world. So it's a little less than half a cup. And it is the lightest of them. Get anything else out of there. And this is going to be blended, and I am actually going to make scones with it. So this is my basic blend. What I will do is I will put this on the website along with maybe a couple of recipes so you can see what you can do with it. And it will be at the Healthy Food Scientist. And if I could find my little clicker, I can't. So give it a try and enjoy.